Good day, folks, and welcome to our second podcast for the ATFA, Talking Wood. Today we've got a very special guest speaker with us today, all the way from over in the United States. This person's been involved in Australian timber flooring industry for quite a long time and had a lot to do in the United States in the industry. So I'd like to welcome you to Christine Coates from all the way from San Francisco, if I'm right there. Hello, Christine.
Hi, Josh. Happy to be here.
It's fantastic.
Wish I was there.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic to have you at the moment, Christine. I know in my time at the ATFA, we've had a lot of emails together, but we've never had the chance to actually meet in person. So this is fantastic. And when I had the idea about putting these podcasts together, you're number one guest I'd like to actually interview. So I'm excited to have you for our second episode. So thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. I guess it's quite a statement. Thanks.
Yeah, no problems.
Not
and
that
I guess. And I guess from our point of view, I know you've had a lot to do in Australia in the timber flooring industry, and obviously in the start of ATFA, you're involved in a few things there. There's obviously a lot of members we still have with the ATFA who will know who you are, and there's obviously a lot of new members that have come over the last few years. You'll be new to them, which will be really interesting, I think, and to hear your story and how you got involved with the industry over the next half an hour. So I kind of would like to start off, Christine, just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're based, and just how you kind of started in the industry.
I was kind of roped into it. Actually, I live in the San Francisco area. Okay. Now that I've been married for a little bit over 25 years, I live just north of the city. Yep. In the Marin County, beautiful area. But I started with the flooring business when I was really quite young, because my father just needed some help in the office. So my grandfather had started a wood flooring distribution business in San Francisco in the 1920s.
Oh, fantastic.
And as the business grew and he became older, my grandfather did, my dad and his brother graduated from becoming truck drivers and warehousemen to managing and running the office and growing the business. And I got dragged in during the summers, probably starting when I was about 13 or 14, just part-time, yep. To help with the books, back when they were books, the big ledgers and the old, calculator. Yep. Yeah, so I did that. And it was a very small office, but I got to hear, because of that, the men would be coming in who were actually doing the wood flooring installation. And I'd hear what they were ordering, and I'd sort of match that up to the invoices over time, and just became more and more familiar, even though I didn't really think I was. I guess the exposure was quite good. Fantastic. And I never thought I would be in the business.
Yeah, my next question was going to lead into, as a young girl, is that what you wanted to do? Was it kind of... Yeah.
No, I liked school quite a bit. And I was at university and just started working part-time again to make some money, and slowly got into it a little bit. Then I took off, as we oftentimes do right after college, and traveled, and I worked in the restaurant business. I enjoyed doing something that let me work in the evenings and make very good money, and then have all day to play. So that was my life. Yeah. And then I wanted to buy a house. Yep. And I realized that I was never going to be able to qualify for mortgages unless I had kind of a 9-to-5 steady income. And my dad said, well, you want to work? We got a place for you. And I started actually not working directly for our family company, but for the corporation that owned it, J.D. Higgins Lumber Company. And I sold hardwood lumber and hardwood plywood. So there's two timber businesses in the United States, and they're pretty different. There's the softwood industry made up of the pines and firs, and that's primarily used for the construction timbers. The hardwood industry, which is mostly from back east, where all those deciduous trees grow, is mostly used for fine interior woodworking, wood flooring, moldings, trim, furniture, and cabinets.
Understand.
And so my part of the business that I first got involved in completely, as a 9-to-5 sales job, was actually selling hardwood lumber and hardwood plywood to cabinet shops and small furniture manufacturers. And after doing that for a few years, my father invited me to come back to Golden State Flooring, and I started switching over, doing sales and learning from the flooring contractors what the products were. And he had me out there in the field quite often. So it was real helpful. Yeah.
Fantastic way to get involved, obviously, through the family business, and obviously learning on the job as you go, especially at such a young age. And the experience obviously you've had over the years now all the way through. I'm sure there's so many stories that you could tell, good, bad, about the industry that you've experienced. So one of the questions that comes to my mind is, in your time in the industry, you've obviously seen a lot of changes. I guess tell us the kind of the biggest changes you've seen, and I'm sure there's been a lot.
Well, some I've seen directly because I was involved, but even when I was quite young, our business, which was, as I said, a hardwood flooring distribution business, which was selling wood flooring to flooring contractors who did the install, the sand, and the finish from the many, many homes that were being built. Following World War II, there was a tremendous building boom here in the United States. The GIs had all come back from the war, and there were loan programs through the government that helped them buy their first homes with a 30-year loan, and it really exploded. Lots of new families, as you can imagine, with all the returning soldiers. The economy was doing well, and the wood flooring business was big, but it was a commodity business. So we were selling primarily what we refer to as strip. In the San Francisco area, there's a thin 5/16 thick. What would that be? About 6 millimeter thick, 2-inch wide, top nailed strip that was used quite a bit. There's only a few areas of the country where that was used.
It's interesting.
But it was being sold, very, very inexpensively, but in huge volume. So the trucks were heading out every day with that or other similar type products. And then what my dad always talks about, what was a real big change, was in '66, Congress passed, after successful lobbying by Dow and other larger chemical companies, they approved the use of wall-to-wall carpeting as a flooring covering in these homes that were being built. And that would have 30-year mortgages on them. Before, you had to have what was considered a permanent floor covering. But these chemical companies successfully showed that this fiber that they created, the synthetic fiber, supposedly can last, the same kind of time. It might last, it would look like heck. But anyway, he said, and I remember it home because things got very, very tight. I was young, but I remember it. It was a real tough time because our business dropped to 1/3 of its volume in something like 4 months. So drastic. Very, very drastic.
Extremely.
Yeah, but in the '70s, there started to be an interest. So about 4 or 5 years later, there was an interest in the coming bicentennial of the United States from our founding. And there was a lot of interest in what we call Americana, kind of the older looks and the qualities that had been part of the early part of the country. And we started selling wider planks and a little bit more, some different species, common American species these days, but they were more unique by the '70s. They were considered really special, like walnut, for example, was a big one. Anyway, what ended up happening is the flooring business changed from strictly a commodity business to more started to become more of a fashion industry. And we tried to capitalize on that by calling on architects locally in the area, the San Francisco there's 9 counties in this area, fairly populated. And we started calling on the architects and visiting them to help them specify the proper thing for that specific application. And so we sort of tried to feed into, sure, anybody can have, strip flooring, and it was still our bread and butter, no doubt.
Of course.
But the profit was coming from the higher margin items. Yeah. And it really, really changed the business for us.
Fantastic.
So, and I think it happened, throughout the rest of the country too, to a greater or lesser extent. California tends to lead the country often in certain design trends for
Okay.
a variety of
Okay.
reasons, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And so what was happening to us started happening in other parts of the country too later. But yeah, so that was one of the biggest changes I saw. Then later, I started to see how engineered flooring went from being a engineered flooring, when I first saw it, was a very inexpensive wood floor that
Yeah.
was typically used in army housing. Okay.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Cheap build.
The story I was told was that they had created a plywood, a hardwood plywood that used a glue line that was water impervious.
Yep.
And from that they were able to build, I think, some kind of sea craft, some kind of ship vessels or whatever. But that ended by the time they figured out how to do that. I don't think there was a whole lot of they probably built the factories, but the war
Yep.
was over. It wasn't such a demand. And they were able to do it and cut it up into 12-inch by 12-inch squares and use it as parquet, they referred to it as. And it went down real cheap and real easy, but it looked pretty funky.
Yeah.
And anyway, so engineered when it first started in the United States was a peeled face veneer. So they take the log and they peel the veneer off of it. So it didn't look like normal oak. It looked different because that peeled veneer always looks
And
different.
when was this kind of time? We're talking 80s now? With the
No, I'm talking about the 70s.
still 70s? Yeah, okay.
Still 70s. So engineered flooring was kind of transitioning, and we found, that it was a great choice. Of course, it was designed, maybe to build boats. Maybe I'm not positive about that.
Yeah.
But it was able to be glued down directly to concrete. And again, that really helped with the building of massive quantities of homes in certain parts of this country where they build a slab. Because in a lot of the country, in the United States, they don't build slab foundations. They build a perimeter concrete wall foundation. And then over that, they put framing and joists. And then on top of that, plywood, solid board, then the wood flooring.
Understand. Yeah, okay. These are a bit different, isn't it?
Yeah, so engineered flooring started to take off less where we are in the Northern California area because we had very few slab construction, but still we were seeing more of it. And as there was a greater and greater demand in parts of the country, that technology just kept really improving. And then by the late 70s, I'm thinking it was, we started to take a look at, or maybe the early 80s, we started to look at bringing in flooring from Northern Europe, primarily Sweden. And they had developed a very interesting engineered floor that used a quarter sawn solid fillet core of timber. And they were the 3-board wide floating floors made by, in the United States back then, it was Tarkett and Cares were the 2 big brands. And that's all of these sort of possibilities of engineered flooring. And that's probably been the biggest thing that I've seen in my working lifetime is the growth of engineered flooring, but mostly the variation of how many different ways there are to make engineered flooring. And the move from peeled veneer faces to sawn faces, completely different look. So it really came closer to mimicking a solid board floor. And then, of course, the finishes. I went through the changes when we went from, again, California led the country in this because we had stricter air quality regulations that drove the change. But we moved from all oil-based finishes, solvent-based, finishes to we started moving into water-based finishes very, very painfully. It was really difficult for the flooring contractor. Everything about it was different. The dry time, the applicators were different. They were no longer, we sold tons and tons of beautiful brushes for brushing on the solvent-based finishes. And then all of a sudden it was like, that's not going to work with a water-based finish. T-bar applicators and all these other methods were a huge change. So the finishes started changing, the engineered flooring, and then we also started to see a change more in the last 20 years of the adhesives.
Yeah, okay. I mean,
Yeah.
it's moving with technology in the end, all products, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, and just quickly, like, so into the States, did the laminates, into the hybrids at the moment, you had bamboo, did they go through all those stages as well with those products?
They came in later. By the time bamboo and plastic laminates came in, engineered flooring was very strong, as
Yep,
was, along with engineered flooring, of course, was pre-finished flooring.
yep.
And that was the other thing that kept evolving, was the quality of the finishes,
Oh,
the ability to mill a very tight profile with small amounts of variation, so you could make a beautiful pre-finished floor
yeah.
that would look similar, very close to a sand and finish floor.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's incredible, the technology and how they've come along now.
Yeah.
How close they are, and and to the consumer's eye, they can't tell the difference anymore. It's, you've got to explain the difference because visually they're pretty close. So,
Yeah.
so I'd like to now move into more the National Wood Flooring Association over in the States, and tell us a bit about your involvement and how that goes and how that started.
Well, I'm not particularly involved except for as a member these days, but it
Okay.
was founded by my father and a group of men who were interested in having an association that represented the entire industry.
Yeah.
So previously we had associations of just manufacturers
Oh,
or
okay.
just, yeah.
Right.
So the two big ones were the NOFMA, which is the National Oak Flooring Manufacturing Association, and the MFMA, the Maple Flooring Manufacturing Association. They were
Okay.
both very big, very strong organizations, but they only represented the manufacturers. And my father used to tell about, they would go to the MFMA meeting because they were the distributors or the contractors who were using or buying the volume of the material that was being manufactured.
Yeah.
But when it would come to the business meeting side of the meeting, of the 2 or 3 day meeting that they'd have,
Yeah.
they would be asked to leave because
Oh,
they weren't actually
part of it.
members.
Yeah,
And
gotcha.
they said, wait a minute, we have as much of an interest in this as the men who are making it. We have some input that we think really should be considered,
Yeah.
or acknowledged. And that's when they sat down, he said, at a meeting like that. And they said, we need to form an organization that represents everybody. And the decision was made early on, I think very critically, that in order to keep your local flooring contractor as important of a member as your largest US flooring manufacturer, everybody would pay the same amount of membership.
Right. Okay.
That way, so at that time, Bruce Company was one of the largest manufacturers in the United States. The concern was that any one company, if they paid a membership fee that was so important to the organization would then follow their demands. And
Okay.
they've said, well, let's keep it even
Yeah.
for everybody. A very, I guess, American
Yep.
Democrat kind of thinking. And that way, nobody is the biggest driver. We are all important. We're all
Yep.
equally important.
And
And
what year are we talking here? When was
oh
this?
gosh,
Yeah, just roughly.
oh, I don't know. The
No.
organization probably 35 years old, I'm thinking,
Okay.
at
Okay.
least.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think first convention I went to was in 88 or 89, and that was the second or third one.
Okay. Okay.
So yeah, so it's quite a
And
while.
and is the organisation now in every state of the United States? Is it grown? Does it cover members everywhere? Or is it just in certain states that are kind of part of the association?
Oh, I think there's members from every state. I mean,
Yeah, covered.
there's 50 of us. I can't imagine 50 states. I mean, I
Yep.
can't imagine. Yeah, and there's members from places outside of the United States too, of course.
Yeah, of course, of course. And
Yeah,
where's head office based for that organisation?
Missouri.
Missouri, right? Okay.
Mhm.
And they have national conferences like the ATFA around the country and stuff each year?
Yeah, well, not this
Of
past year.
course, of
Yep.
course.
And this year it's going to be later than normal to sort of accommodate the COVID situation. But yeah, they have them every year. They have they call it the largest wood flooring meeting in the world because it's strictly wood flooring. But
Yeah.
it's not just wood flooring. It's of course wood flooring and all of the products that go with wood flooring, the machinery, the adhesives, the finishes. Yeah.
The whole
But
system.
if you're interested in wood flooring, that's the place to go.
Yeah, well, unbelievable. And so have you had were you a president of that association?
I was. I got involved fairly early on because it strictly was a volunteer-run organization.
Right.
We had no, at the very, very early years, we had no paid employees. Everybody volunteered. And then eventually people worked kind of part-time and then full-time. But even for years after that, all of the work was done by volunteers, very much like the ATFA was.
Yeah.
And I got roped into doing, I believe, either membership. Yeah, membership, I think, was my first job. And then from there, it just, yeah.
You got any tips for me? Yeah, okay. And so how many staff are now does the NWFA employed, you know?
I really, Josh, I couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
They have, I know they've whittled the team down quite a bit, but in the last couple of years, the last year or so. Yeah. But I really don't know how many there are.
That's okay. No, just wondering, kind of, you know, I know they're a big organisation compared to the ATFA where we are, you know, and been around obviously a lot longer. So it's just seeing those steps and comparing kind of the associations. So I guess that leads me to my next question, Christine. I guess, you know, about your first trip to Australia with your timber flooring. You know, how did you get involved in Australia and your thoughts when you came out to Australia for the first time from the United States? We'll just go down those kind of paths. G'day guys, just me stepping in before we hear about Christine's first trip down under. A note from our sponsors.
At Urethane Coatings, we are 100% Australian owned and manufactured. Oil-based, waterborne, and solvent-based floor and concrete coatings. Our flagship products, in the Monothane and Watercoat Systems range, reveal beautiful finishes, each and every time. Urethane Coatings, really looking the goods. Urethane Coatings, for all your timber and concrete coating needs. Visit us at www.urethanecoatings.com.au for more details.
Thanks to Urethane Coatings for sponsoring this series. Now back to Christine, the first time in Australia.
Well, I got involved because my father met Keith Sullivan, who at that time was the general manager, I think was the term, of Boral Timber.
Yes.
And Keith and he had met at some organizational meeting in, I think up in the northwest of the United States. And they talked about the fact that Boral had found it very difficult to sell these beautiful Australian timbers as flooring in the United States. And my father basically volunteered me to assist them to try to create a product that was suitable for the United States market.
Right.
So I got partnered up with their export manager, John Wallace. Oh, yeah. And we developed a fantastic relationship, and we built a U.S. business for Boral over here, selling the Australian species, milled to the U.S. standards, which was different than how flooring was manufactured in Australia at the time. The tongue and groove profile was different, the moisture content was different, and the packaging was significantly different.
Oh, right. So there was a lot of changes had to be made for the Boral product.
Yeah, and Boral was very good at that. I mean, you know, it takes a lot of convincing to get a big organization like that to do something different than the way they know how to do it.
Sure does.
But they had very good people who recognized that if they wanted to be in the market, that's what they needed to do. And anyway, so John invited me over to Australia at some point. I'm trying to remember even what year it was. And Malcolm came and met me. Malcolm Johnson came and picked me up from the airport back when, you know, there was no tunnel to drive through to get from Sydney, from the airport to downtown. And I remember my first impression was looking at all these buildings and all these very battered old cars and all these buildings that had tarps on the roof. And I thought, wow, this must be like a really not good part of town or something. And we, I think we we went to lunch and we met John and Keith and, had a good time. And I finally, Malcolm and I took off that night actually to go to Tasmania the next day, because at that time Boral owned the Tasmanian mills there. That was before guns.
Right, that's interesting. I'm from Tasmania myself.
I think they purchased, the Risby mill, and then I'm not sure exactly of the history, but anyway, we went to Tasmania that evening. But I remember finally, because I'd never met Malcolm before, finally saying, "Gosh, I was surprised that on the drive in that it looked so, rough." And apparently there'd been this massive hailstorm, like within the last few days, and the roofs had been destroyed, and the cars had been battered to pieces.
Yes.
And so I was like, oh, I feel so much better. It's a beautiful country. I'd hate to think it was,
not the great first experience.
Yeah. But it was, I was taken with Australia from the minute I got there. Really loved it.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And so
first meal was at Doyle's. I mean, can't go wrong.
No, that's exactly right. And you obviously made the trip out here quite a few times in your time.
I have, yeah.
And so, and what's your current involvement? Do you still have business in Australia at the moment?
Just a small amount. Yeah. I mean, I stay in touch with people primarily, but not a lot of business in Australia.
Yeah, okay. And I guess my next question leads to, I guess, the ATFA starting up 16 years ago. You've obviously seen that from the start and to where it is now. So I guess give us a few of your thoughts on the ATFA, what you saw, and what it's probably growing to now.
I think I remember speaking mostly to Robert about it.
Yes.
Robert Clegg, knew right away. He had the vision. And it's the same thing that happened here in the United States. There's always certain men that have the vision, that understand what an organization can do for an industry. And we spent a lot of time in groups talking about what I thought would be successful in Australia, knowing that there's a lot of similarities between, I think, the Australian character and the US character.
Yeah.
And I think there's even more similarity, actually, between the wood flooring contractors in Australia and the U.S. wood flooring contractors. Very, very similar.
Okay.
And I just thought, that you would be well served to sort of follow the same kind of program. Include everybody. Don't make a hurdle so that people can't join. Instead, take the guy who maybe isn't as polished in his business practices and expose him to what can make him be a better, more successful contractor. Correct. Instead of excluding him because he hasn't quite met your standards.
Yeah.
And I thought that was very, very important. And I was very vocal about that. And there were some people who, really said, well, we can't have certain kind of people in here who don't have certain credentials and I just said, no, please don't do it. And in the end, I think you were very, very inclusive.
Yeah.
And I think it's worked out quite well. And you've raised the character and the industry because of what's contributed by the organization, specifically by all of the men like Robert and Barry and the Stringers and Malcolm and everybody who contributed as, their own hard work to help everybody else. Yeah.
Very well said. I totally agree. Exactly right. Robert had a vision, obviously, and a few of the other guys had that vision, and and a bit of obviously education from you guys in the States, which kind of put them in the right direction. And that's where we are now, which is a thriving association, and as you guys are still over in the States. So, I guess I'm going to change tact a little bit now. I'm going to go down to obviously. The world's changed a lot in the last 12 months with what's happened with the pandemic. How has that affected over in the States in the timber sides of things? Are you guys in Australia, I should say at the moment, like we're obviously got some issues with getting supply in. We had the bushfires only 12 months ago, which has obviously hurt a lot of suppliers as well. But as an industry in general, the contractors you speak to, most are flourishing at the moment around Australia due to we have a lot of, obviously, international borders are closed, state borders have been closed. So the consumers not having those family holidays or getting out of the country. So there seems to be a lot of home renovations going on and new builds in Australia, which, you know, is really good for the contractors in our industry, but obviously getting the supply is a bit harder than it should be. Are you guys kind of seeing the same thing, or is it a bit different in the States?
Yeah, I would say definitely. I remember my husband, who has a wood flooring contracting business, I think he said in last November, he said, we're booked through February. He said, we're the busiest we've ever been.
Yeah.
And I know some of the distribution companies had their biggest years ever. The biggest problem has now become in the United States is the supply of our domestic timbers. Certain things are just really, really hard to come by. And I don't know if that's necessarily COVID related or if it's related to weather, because we have this situation where a lot of the timber grows in the Southeast, particularly in the winter, they get rain. And if it gets too wet, they can't get into the forest to do the harvesting. So there's this huge lag then of material coming in for air drying and then to going into the kiln. So that could really put a dent, because that flow has to constantly happen.
And which regions in the Southwest were you kind of talking about is where they harvest from? Southeast, sorry.
Yeah. So most of the hardwoods in the United States, the oak hardwoods, come from what we call the Appalachian forests. So it's kind of a whole chain that goes from north to south, from Pennsylvania down through, there's mills in Alabama, all the way down.
All the way down. Yeah, okay. That's interesting.
And then, of course, you've got more of the maple mills a little further west in, Michigan and areas like that. There's a lot of timber in Ohio and Indiana, Kentucky, places like that all were just short in supply. And then, of course, with the growth of the importing from the East, Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia, China, it's been the lack of containers and the freight costs that have really limited, a lot of things are stock or, just hard to come by.
You're kind of saying this is pretty much on par with Australia by the sounds of it. Yeah. The contractors are busy, the supply is hard to get for solid and for import and export. So, okay. And so obviously we've got hybrid at the moment. Seems to be the new kind of very popular with the consumer. Everyone's talking about hybrids. Is that kind of coming to the States now, the hybrid flooring?
What do you refer to as hybrid?
The SPC, solid wood composites, and the plastic wood composites. So we've got a lot of those coming out of Southeast Asia at the moment, and there seems to be a lot of consumers very keen to use these products. It seems to be the new, I don't know, we had bamboo obviously 5 to 7 years ago, which everyone was kind of talking about. And now that's kind of, it's still here, but hybrid seems to be the new one everyone's talking about. And I was just wondering, is it kind of into the States at the moment, your plastic composites?
It started kind of with the luxury vinyl tile.
Yeah.
And then into the SPCs, WPCs, and everybody seems to make them a bit different. They're basically all synthetic floors. They're not really related to wood flooring, other than a lot of them use a wood visual
print,
and they do tremendously well. They're very, very inexpensive.
Yeah,
people love the waterproof feature. That they're less sensitive to moisture and the wearability, but they're going to wear, and when they wear, they can't be refinished.
Correct, exactly right. So it's just interesting. So that kind of leads me to my next kind of question was, where do you see the industry going in the future, and what's your kind of thoughts on it? Obviously, we don't have crystal balls, but the timber flooring industry, it's been strong for so long. We'd like to continue. Apart from obviously supply is a big concern, I think, all around the world for solid timber. What's your kind of thoughts on the next kind of stages in the industry?
Well, with our new government, we've had previously with the Trump government, there were a lot of tariffs that were placed on flooring that was imported primarily from China, that really made an attempt to make more of an even playing field between the United States and the imported pricing.
Right.
But I don't think it was very effective. And I don't think it was effective because even though if you're in the industry or you're an installer or you're a distributor, but if you're a consumer, you don't see that constant price change you saw from 10 years ago or 6 years ago when you bought the flooring, right?
Correct.
So you expect things to go up. So I don't know that the tariffs made a big deal. And then, of course, a lot of the Chinese companies just moved to places like Cambodia, where the U.S. or Vietnam, where the U.S. allows them to import into the U.S. or export into the U.S. with no tariffs whatsoever.
Yeah.
So it's, so it just sort of dispersed the factories a bit over Asia. But now they're talking about cutting a lot of those down. So I don't know if it's enough to make a difference in their growth in the United States. We lost a lot of mills over the last, when I was younger, we had so many solid mills here in the United States. A lot of the families owned the timberland, and they would manage that timberland, and they would sell hardwood lumber. Primarily, the higher grades of the lumber would go into the cabinet shops and the furniture manufacturing. That was such a big part of business or manufacturing in the United States. Okay. And the lower grades go into the flooring. But that business also went offshore. In other words, the furniture business and the cabinet making also went overseas. And so those mills basically had a hard time staying alive, and so many have closed. So what I'd like to see happen is that we start to see places get reopened, because, I think that I was talking to my brother this morning. I think 2.25 wide, 3/4, so 19 millimeter by what's 2.25, 80, 65, something like that, about 65. Yeah. Tongue and groove strip in white oak is at wholesale levels around low $4 range right now per square foot.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's close to what, $44 US per square meter.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the exchange rate is with Australia, but that's a high price for what we call a commodity item.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
G'day, timber flooring gurus. My next guest is a legend in the industry in Australia. He's one of the founding fathers of setting up the ATFA, and he's got a fantastic story to tell. And I can't wait to bring it all to you very soon.
And realised I was in over my head. So I rang my old mate Baz up and I said, Baz, I've got some work, I need help, come and give us a hand. So he come and help me on the weekend. And you might find this hard to believe, but when we finished, we went to the pub. Had a couple of beers, and
I'm a bit shocked with that one.
And Baz wasn't doing much at that time himself, so we formed a little handshake agreement over another 20 beers, and we were partners for about 5 years.
Right.
And we contracted to Cork Interiors, Queensland Parquetry, and we were contractors then, and we just got all the work. We did a little bit of our own work, which we did after hours.
Yep.
So we worked really hard, and when we weren't working, we went back to where our first meeting place was, and played there as well.
And with plenty more stories like that to look forward to, stay tuned for Robert Clay. Now back to Christine.
You would like to see obviously more sawmills opening in the future, coming back open and getting back on board, which is obviously what we'd like to see that here in Australia too. Is the kind of, I guess what I'm trying to say, in America.
Because our flooring plants here make engineered flooring, and a lot of them make it very, very well.
Right.
They make typically what I call the 2-ply, mostly they make a 2-ply construction, not all of them, where they use the Baltic birch that they import as the bottom layer and the sawn face layer from American species. There are some mills that are doing making their plywood and or their core and plywood out of American species, which is what we used to do. And if we could have more of that happening in the United States, I think that would be terrific.
Yeah, and it seems to be yesterday's stuff seems to be coming back into fashion as well with the solid timber.
Yeah, we're doing a lot of herringbones and chevrons, and parquet patterns are quite big again. Yes,
they've come back, which is fantastic. You know what I mean? And like to see more of it. And obviously, if the consumer can be educated with the product and the advantage of the solid timber, it's got to be a win-win for all of us in the industry. Against some of these do-it-yourself products they have out there that look like timber, which isn't timber. So I think it's all about education. It comes down to, and that starts from the showroom that consumer walks into, to the person selling that product, having the right information, because obviously, as you know, the timber floors suit people's lifestyles, and they need to be tailored and educated what's going to suit their lifestyles these days. There's a lot of people don't want stuff that's only going to last for a couple of years. And some people don't want a product they want to have to maintain all the time. So it's just obviously education, and we see that all around the world, that the right information needs to be passed on to the consumers.
I think it depends where someone is in their life too. You've got a young family who are buying their first home. They're going to get whatever that builder puts into the home, and he's going to pick something that looks fashionable but is relatively inexpensive. That's where those hybrid products, as you talk about, really have a lot of play. But we're also seeing a lot of those projects, depending on the part of the country you're talking about, go with pre-finished engineered floors also. But again, it depends on the price point. But as that couple matures, as the kids grow up, then they want to reinvest in that home or move on up to the next home. Then that's when they start to look at better quality wood, real wood flooring, or maybe something with a little more design sense, or maybe something more, maybe a wider plank or a narrower plank or a herringbone in the dining room, or they start to make those kinds of choices because they have the budget to do it.
Correct. Yeah, I understand. So I guess I want to finish with my last question pretty much today, Christine. So will we be seeing you out in Australia in the near future? Obviously, once borders open up, is there any plans to come out to catch up?
Start with borders open up. Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
But in the future, is there any plans?
Oh, yeah, no, I'd love to come back. Yeah, I'm sure I'll be back before too terribly long, but most of my travel in the last few years has been to Europe. I've been doing quite a bit over there, so I've spent more time doing that. And but I'd love to be back in Australia.
No, fantastic. And I'd love to actually catch up with you in person and have a coffee with you when you do come to Australia, that's for sure. So I'd like to obviously thank you for your time today, Christine, and giving it up. I'm sure the listeners would be really appreciate the story that you've told, and just the education of a bit more what's happening over in the States for our listeners. So it's fantastic. So thank you for being my guest today.
Oh, well, thank you, Josh. Thanks for the invitation, and I look forward to seeing you in person.
Beautiful. Thanks, Christine. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
All right, I hope you all enjoyed today's ATFA podcast, guys. We'll have a new one coming to you very soon, so please, for the time being, stay safe, and a final word from our sponsor today.
Urethane Coatings, for all your timber and concrete coating needs. Visit us at www.urethanecoatings.com.au for more details.